And welcome back to Devlog. In the last part, I elaborately cloned myself in order to be more efficient. Unfortunately, all the clones being me, we all did the exact same thing, and animated the same sequence 12 times. And in this part, I work on adding a new weapon type, and I don't remember what else, I don't know, some other stuff. The first thing I did was make it so if the player is still holding down the input stick after dodging, they will start sprinting. Honestly, on this one I was just playing the videos game Scarlet Nexus, and it has the exact same mechanic, so I just ripped it off. I think it adds more mobility to the dodge roll, as in you can instantly start sprinting and gain mobility out of it, but then you're stuck sprinting and that can be difficult for maneuverability or input combos, or if you're not holding the input after sprinting, after dodging. If you press dodge and are not holding the input, you will not start sprinting out of the dodge. I might delete this, or I might just keep this for regular dodges and have different dodges if you are in the middle of combat. So if you're moving normally and use a dodge, you can use your dodge for more of a mobility option by sprinting out of it, or if you're in the middle of combat, your dodge is automatically relegated to whatever dodge your current weapon has. I then made it so that the state system, substate system for the weaponry did not exist anymore. The reason for this was that certain attacks were being incredibly too complicated while having too many state and substate systems, while having ones that may not necessarily define themselves as a ready, a swing, or a recoil state. So instead I just made it so that the weaponry system just has a list of animations that play, and each of these animations have their own list of information for how they should move, what they exit into, if they can be interrupted, if they follow into another attack, things of this nature. Essentially just each attack animation can have different parts, which you will see in some of the future attacks where they may swing multiple times. It also needed to be a bit more complicated, as the system I had before had the ready, swing, and recoil states, with the readying being that you can roll out of it and cancel out of it, and the recoil instantly going into another attack and stopping any attack collision inputs. The issue with this was that I was having the problem where certain attacks were going into the next attack far too quickly, but if I extended the swing time, that would mean the hitboxes were out for longer, so I then basically just made an array where this could be extended into different values. So the way one attack could work now is it has the system for starting the attack, this being that you can cancel out at this time. The readying, we can no longer cancel out of the attack, but we haven't started attacking yet. The swing, we are currently swinging our attack, we are doing damage on these frames. The recoil, we finished swinging but we can't go into our next attack, and the follow through, this is either the ending of the attack or when we can use another attack. Each of these systems work the same way the substate systems did, where they have their own exit information for if they could be rolled out of, or if they could be exited out of if you do damage, or information for how they would push a character, or audio information that they would make. Things like this. Essentially they're just very complicated. This also means I don't need to do frame data for attack inputs. All I need to do is one specific attack, that is the length of the attack hitbox collision, and that just fills in any information that is needed for an attack. Because all the scripting needs for the length of the attack information is just how long the clip is long for, and as long as we are playing that clip, we will be attacking that clip. So I just separate the animations based on their individual motions. This does make it very complicated for importing animations, because one animation could be 7 clips, but that's more just tedious than it is difficult, so that's okay. I then added the jump input for attacks. This is for follow-up attacks. Essentially, you can make a follow-up attack with a jump input instead of just a light or a heavy input. This makes it so that attack inputs can be a lot more complicated without needing stick inputs or really complicated button presses. I can just add attacks that you trigger by pressing the jump input, so this would be pressing a swing and then pressing the jump input. These sort of attacks would almost always be launcher attacks, or attacks that launch the player into the air, so launch the enemy or launch the player, attacks that make some sort of aerial mobility, or attacks that are upwards in some way. This all reads very easily because the circle jump button makes the player go up in the air, so if you press that while making an attack, the attack would also go up in the air, mostly just for more attack complexity. Most attack weaponry probably won't use the jump input. It would just be sort of a thing that you could use in certain attack swings to maneuver yourself to do more aerial mobility. Like if you're in the middle of an attack string and you want to knock the enemy into the air, you can make the next attack by pressing a circle input, not a circle input, a jump input, and that would knock the enemy into the air. This is made in the exact same way that you make any single attack inputs. It's just the same information but with a different bool being passed. I then worked on a different attack model, weapon model. I worked on a different weapon model. This was because I thought the sword and the shield was a bit too basic and also not fun to use, and also I didn't like any of the attacks I had made for it, so I wanted to rework the main equipment that I started on, and I thought something more complex and interesting would be more fun to do, so I made a axe and also a gun, but then I removed that. Initially the design for this weapon there was going to be an axe and also a pistol that you would use, so you would slash with the axe and then you would use the pistol, but I removed that for a reason I will explain in a moment. But this is the main weapon the character has at this current point. I really like the design for this that I came up with. It was inspired mainly by one of the axes in the Disgaea series, and also the halberd design in So Little Not, which is probably the dorkiest sentence I've ever said. But I really like it. It's a very bulky axe. It has a very thick blade part on the end. The handle has this nice little heart design. I quite like how it turned out. It's very big and it's very bulky. It's bigger than the actual player is, which I think is pretty funny if the actual weapon design is larger than the player. And I just like this design a whole lot. It has a little heart on the handle because it's cute, and no other reason. When designing this, I also had an idea to make this into a chainsaw axe, but that would require reworking a lot of the animations I had already made for it, so maybe I will also add chainsaw axes in the future. This weapon has a whole lot of spinning and throwing attacks, so to accentuate this, instead of using the gun, I worked it so the player would hold another axe in their offhand, this being just a smaller axe. You can probably tell this is just a resize of the main axe, with the backwards blade from the back of the axe made into a primary blade. This is just a smaller version of the main axe, so there's not a whole lot to say. It has the same bulky design and the same colour scheme and the same heart on the handle. So the original moveset for this axe was going to be that you would have the axe and then a gun as a moveset, so you would slash attacks and then you would use the gun to shoot the enemies. The issue with this was that the moveset for the axe is very close ranged and you're doing a lot of slow sweeping attacks at a large range to shoot enemies, but then the gun is a long range weapon, so you'd have to use the sweep attacks and then dash backwards and use the gun, but then you're not at the range where you can use follow-up attacks with the axe, so you'd have to dash back with the axe. Essentially the combination of the axe gun didn't really work well to make the moveset very engaging for the player. It was more fiddly and complicated to perform. It was very boring. It had a lot of movement and move steps, and that didn't work well with the axe design I wanted, because I wanted it to be more heavy and clunky. On account of the axe being the size of the player, it's difficult to swing, so I removed that moveset. I think a good example of this sort of moveset that would have worked well would be the lance gun from Monster Hunter, where it is a big clunky weapon but it also has a weaponry attached to it. I think in the future if I wanted to make a melee weapon that also has ranged abilities, I'd probably do something like that, where it is more interlinked to the actual attack, in opposed to making an attack that is one part one weapon, one part another weapon that don't mix. But it did lead me to make it so that I have the dual axe setup, in opposed to just one axe with a gun. You have two axes, which is more fun. But realistically, using the gun was just compromising the moveset of both weaponry, so I would rather have a more complicated axe moveset and a more complicated gun moveset as different individual weapons, because they could more expand on each other's movesets by themselves. Without compromising all half of the axes attack weapons to be gun attacks, I can just make an expansive axe moveset, and then when I have the guns I can make an expansive gun moveset, so that is why the gun is no longer here. While I still had the gun, I was working on the complexity and the logic for firing projectiles while I have a weapon, and luckily I already made a devlog on this. It was called Projectile. It was a game about shooting guns. I just used pretty much the exact same logic for projectiles that I used in that game. I just reworked it so it was based on your weapon targeting towards enemies. So all I did with this was make certain attacks and frames and certain timings based on your attacks when you would fire a bullet weapon. This would make a bullet firing effect and would create a bullet. The bullet then travels through the air as it normally would, and it hits the enemies as it normally would for a bullet. The only difference being that since there is no actual aiming in my game, because it's not a third-person shooter, it's just more of an action setup. And in design, I think it would be boring to make the player start aiming all of a sudden when they weren't used to doing that throughout the main game. I instead worked on a system for the bullets to auto-aim. All this really does is it uses a targeting system the player uses for lock-on or regular attacking. It finds the closest enemy in an angle direction towards the player, forward direction, and it rotates our bullet automatically to target that enemy once we fire it. This is still not going to automatically track towards the enemy, it's just going to move towards its direction initially, but it makes it so that the player can easily aim when using attacks. So if they are roughly in the vague direction of the enemy, they will most likely hit the enemy with the bullet when firing a weapon. And this is currently still pretty basic because I'm not really using projectile weaponry. I stopped polishing the system, but the system is in place so when I add actual projectile weaponry in the future. Like the moveset for 2 handguns, and it also tapes your fist. You punch the enemy and then you shoot the that's just Bayonetta but with punching instead of kicking. I then added the information for hit stun on hitting enemies. If you don't know what hit stun is, this is when you hit something and time goes slow. It is a common thing in a lot of action games, most action games. It can be seen very easily in Bayonetta. Bayonetta uses a lot of hit stun. I wanted a small amount of hit stun, so for my system you hit the enemy, the time slows down very slightly, and then speeds up back to normal time very quickly. And this is a common technique for adding more impact to your attacks, so they actually really look like they have made damage to the enemy. I don't particularly know the logistics behind why this is. If I'm being honest, it mostly just looks nice. I tried to keep the hit stun still pretty subtle when it does happen, so it really doesn't, if you're going frame by frame, it really doesn't appear to be that much hit stun. It's just the game slightly slowing as you hit something and then speeding back up very quickly, so basically it gives more weight and emphasis to your swing because of the way time is dilated as you swing and hit something based on if you swung and didn't hit anything at all. This is using an adaptable scaling technique. If you want a tutorial on hit stun, I made one. It's the first video I ever made. It's not good, but I made one. All this does is affects the Unity timescale down to a specific amount. It will then keep the Unity timescale at this specific amount for a delayed value, which I set up with the hit stun value. It will then restore our time based on our restore time, how quickly we go back to having normal time. In some games, hit stun is more just a framework thing. I think in Bayonetta when you hit something it is 1 extra frame or 2 extra frames where it just doesn't continue time. Smash Bros uses a lot of hit stun for big attacks. Things like this, they just give emphasis and weight when you make an attack. I'm probably going to add something in the future that makes it even more adaptable, so if you do a larger attack, it's going to increase more hit stun than if you do a smaller attack, which isn't going to give back as much hit stun. So big attacks will create more hit stun, have more emphasis and more weight behind them. Small attacks will have less hit stun, less emphasis, less weight behind them. Finally, I have the actual moveset for the weaponry, which is, this time, not too complicated because it's completely unfinished. Last week I did a whole lot of work to make the sword and the shield work, have all of its animations, but I really wanted to really focus on the animations because I felt last week's animations were a bit rushed and not very good, so I really wanted to focus on the animations that I made this week to make them a lot more, look good, and also fit well with the attack. I felt with the sword and shield a lot of the attack animations didn't really read well or go into each other very easily, so this week I wanted to really focus on how the attacks for the dual axes would go into each other and also how they would look. First, discussing the animations, I made 2 new heavy attacks. These are just heavy attack swings. The first one is you swinging the weapon around, you lifting it over your head and doing a large slash. I really like how this one looks. It took me a while to make it because I was really focusing on getting the weight of the weapon. The idea behind a lot of these attacks was that it should really convey how heavy the axe is. It's a really big axe, it's going to have a lot of weight behind it, so for the heavy swing, it's a lot of time of you lifting the axe above your head, and even then it's still weighing on the ground, and then very quickly twisting your body around to do a big heavy swing forward. This attack takes a long time. Most of the attacks for the dual axe take a long time. They are heavy attacks. The second heavy attack is the follow-up for this. You are lifting the weapon back above your head. This one does not take as much time to lift the weapon, so it doesn't really make sense logically. While the first attack would take so few time to lift above your head, but the second attack is a lot faster, coming out and then sliding down the weapon again as another big slash. You might be able to tell that in the initial parts of this attack you do kind of kick up on your right leg to gain some momentum to push the axe higher above your head, but this is called in the same method where you're just swinging the axe very heavily downwards. The next attack I have is the wild swing attack. I really like this one. This one took a whole lot of time to do, but I'm proud of how it looked. Essentially what this attack is, it's the follow-up for the 2 heavy attacks, so this is technically your 3rd heavy attack, but it is also a I don't think anything follows up from this, so it's also a combo ender, but I could have another attack for him. This is the 3rd heavy attack. You make this after your 2nd heavy attack, another heavy attack input. This is you going from that attack, you're lifting the weapon high above your head again, you're reeling back really far this time, and you're swinging forward with a whole lot more force, so much so that it spins your character around. You're then steadying yourself after the first spin, you're bringing the weapon around again in a more high up swing, and then finally you're using the momentum of this swing. You've lost control of your character and you're following through this momentum, and you're just piercing forward with the axe weaponry. I like how this one looks too. I think the second attack doesn't have the greatest hitbox. It goes up too high, so it might miss enemies. But it's also a giant weapon, so you're probably going to hit what you're aiming at. On account of it being a giant axe, you can just swing this at anything and it'll probably hit it. The light and the heavy attacks for this weapon are the light and, the first 2 light attacks that I haven't made any more yet. I'm just making these over attacks. The first 2 light attacks for the dual axe are just the heavy attacks for the sword and shield that I made. I like how these ones look. They're really good looking attacks. I didn't want to get rid of them. I then have the light coil. This is a follow-up from your first attack. This is a light follow-up for your heavy attack. So this is you jumping into the air and doing this really nice spin. This has a lot of the motion for the dual axe that I wanted to have. The dual axe's whole gimmick is that it's a very good crowd control weapon because it is very big, it's very bulky, it's very slow, but it does have a huge range and attacks that spin around in a circle. If you're surrounded by enemies, the dual axe is probably great because it's going to hit everything around you, and it's also got a big stun to it. It's a good weapon for that sort of thing. The light coil is emblematic of this because it just spins in a circle, you're hitting everything, you're doing a whole lot of damage, big spin attack. I like how this one looks. I then have the follow-up for the light coil. This is you just swinging your axe more heavily out of the light coil. You're doing the initial swing. Is that an initial swing? I'm watching it right now. It is an initial swing. I didn't have good perspective when viewing this video. when viewing the animation, so I was a little confused. And then it's going above your head and you're carrying the momentum, doing another slash. This is just a very quick attack out of your light coil. And then have the uppercut animations, upward slashes. This is you slashing upwards, or if you hold the input for this being a jump input weapon, you will slash upwards and actually go into the air. Just a nice uppercut. As I said, the actual moveset in-game is designed to be more of a crowd control option rather than any other sort of moveset usage, so this moveset or this weaponry is best used when you are surrounded by a lot of enemies, or you want to deal a high amount of damage and get a stun out very quickly by dealing damage to an enemy, but I haven't added stunning yet, so when I add stunning, that feature will be available. But since I haven't actually finished this moveset, I will go into the details of what the moveset actually does, probably when I've actually finished this weapon. But for now, you can keep in mind that the general idea with this weapon is it does high damage, it takes a long time to actually use a swing, it's a very heavy weapon, it's a heavy weaponry option, does high damage, covers a large area, has a large range, is a pretty big weapon. As for the in-air functions, a lot of these involve slamming on enemies or spinning in spirals down towards enemies for max damage, but not all of them have in-air combos or in-air juggles for keeping enemies in air. It's mostly just big slashes, so maybe if you wanted to keep an enemy in mid-air, you could slash them up with the light and then jump attack, and then you could switch weapon, because I'm adding that, switch weapon to something that could juggle enemies easier, and then juggle the enemy in the air with that weapon. For example, maybe. I then got bored and wanted to make a sword swinging animation, so I made this set of strings for a heavy sword attack combo. It's unfinished, obviously, but I just wanted to show it off. I think it looks fun. I think it's a fun attack combo. I think if I want to add a longsword attack combo to the game, I have the only creative idea I have is a longsword that you teleport to, so you throw it and you teleport it. You teleport to the sword you threw into the enemy, but that's for future updates. And that is everything I did this week. It was a lot of minor additions and then also working on the moveset for the axe. I'm still not 100% if I want this idea for the axe. I think I have a lot of uncertainty as to the feedback of the moveset, or if it's very fun to use, and generally just the combat in general, if it's engaging for players. I think the issue is for a lot of the attacks, I'm not sure if I find them to be particularly satisfying or if I find the combat satisfying to perform, but that may also be just because I'm a huge snob for action games, because action games and 3D platformers are the main things that I play, so I have a high bar for what a good action combat could be. So maybe I'm just a snob about this and I'm too critical of my own work, but I am definitely interested to hear what you, personally, you right now, think of the combat or the swings, if they are satisfying or good to see. I spent a lot of time with the animations trying to make them feel weighty and fun to perform, but personally at this point it kind of feels a little bit stale to me, and I'm not sure why. I think all of the elements individually that I've added this week and to the game in general are very fun systems, and it plays okay. It's just for some reason it doesn't really feel as good as it could be to me. It might just be the lack of enemies in game, since you're mostly swinging at static sandbag things and there isn't any movement recoil or things of that nature, so maybe something like that could make the game more satisfying and fun to play through, but I'm really not sure. All this is to say, if I inexplicably start working on this devlog next week and work on a 2D platformer Metroidvania set in a 2000s sci-fi world called Half's Tomorrows, don't act too surprised. Although realistically I think this is probably because I have not added enemies yet, and I think once I actually add something to hit that would actually respond to your character without just a rigging recoil setup, something that actively moves about and is pushed back by your attacks and can be juggled, it will be a whole lot more satisfying. The reason I came to this conclusion is because a few years ago I made a 2D game where you have Smash Bros. Like attacks and you attack enemies on a planet, and it had 2D planet physics. It wasn't very good, and I still have a video of it on my channel, but the idea is that when I was playing that to test it all those years ago, it was actually pretty satisfying to hit the enemies, just because the enemies had a lot of hit stun when you hit things, and also because there was actually impacts with the enemies being pushed back. So I think once I add that, it will actually be more fun, and not just me hitting a block and then blood come out. So I think next week I will work on enemy AI. It pains me so, but I must do it.